Since joining FRC in the fall of 2003, he has launched new initiatives to affirm and defend the Judeo-Christian values of this nation that this nation was founded upon. Tony has a tremendous burden to reclaim the culture for Christ and believes that this revival will begin in the churches across America. To reach across denominational and racial and economic lines and build on shared values of family and freedom is his hope and goal. Under his leadership, FRC has established a thriving church ministries program that is rapidly expanding and engaging Christians in civil affairs as never before. A veteran of the U.S. Marine Corps and a former police officer and a television news reporter, Tony brings his unique blend of experience and leadership to the pro-family movement. He received his undergraduate degree from Liberty University and a master's degree from Louisiana State University and a master's degree from there, and in public administration as well. In May 2006, he received an honorary doctorate in theology from Liberty University. Tony and his wife, married in 1986, have 5 children. Ladies and gentlemen, as you heard Pastor Scott share a moment ago, he is the tip of the spear when it comes to promoting, defending, and championing our family values. South Dakota, tonight you not only have the opportunity to thank this man for coming to our great state once again, but right now, in a moment, is your opportunity to thank him for carrying our family values torch in the public arena when few else would. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a strong, warm welcome to Tony Perkins here tonight.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. It is great to be back in South Dakota. My only regret is that I did not bring my shotgun, but other than that, it's great to be here. And I want to thank Dale for your leadership. We have the opportunity to work with a number of these family policy councils. In fact, I started the one in Louisiana back when I was in office. Back in 1997, I began the Louisiana Family Forum. I was actually looking for an organization that I could get an award from, so I created the organization. But I know the work that it takes to build an organization like this and to run an organization like this. And Dale, you are doing a fantastic job. I can't think of anyone who has the temperament, the heart of a pastor, the compassion that he has, as well as the desire to be advancing faith, family, and freedom. And when this invitation came a number of months ago, I will be very candid with you. A lot of the invitations never make it to my desk because my team kind of filters a lot of those out to keep me close to home. But they brought me this and they said, "This is from Pastor Dale, you've got to go." And so I'm here tonight in large part because of your leadership and for the great job that you're doing here in South Dakota. Let's thank Dale for his leadership. And I want to thank our MC. I've known Scott for a number of years. My first invitation to be with him was actually in Hawaii, back when he was pastoring there in Hawaii. The environment is not quite the same here in South Dakota, but it's good. It's a little different, but we enjoy it. And I want to thank Senator Rounds, Governor Rounds, for being here tonight, soon to be. I understand this is a C3 event. That was a Freudian slip. And I also want to thank Pastor Wade for hosting us here tonight and opening your church, being supportive of this organization, but of hosting us here tonight. Thank you so much. It actually makes me much more comfortable to be here in a church speaking tonight rather than doing a political speech. People don't believe this, but I despise politics. I actually, growing up, never thought about being in politics. In fact, the Lord called me to preach when I was 15 years old, and so I feel much more comfortable behind a pulpit. Now, the Lord called me to preach. He called me at 15, and I began preaching. He called me to preach in nursing homes. Little did I know that that was preparation for the legislature. Both groups are kind of hard of hearing and slow of moving. But when I was elected, it was interesting because, too many Christians are just not involved. And so I want to thank you for being here tonight and being supportive of the work that FHA is doing. It's so vital to the well-being, not of just South Dakota, but to the rest of the nation. You may not realize this, but you have an influence on the rest of the nation based upon how your state takes a stand. And so if you did not have such an organization, you would have a vacuum. And I actually like that, Scott, where you've become the fourth branch of government here in the state of South Dakota. That's a tribute to your tenacity and to your hard work. But I was asked shortly after I was elected, people say, what's it like to be in office? I said, well, it's kind of hard to explain, but I found a story that kind of illustrates it. It was about these three guys who were sitting together on an airplane. One was a surgeon, one was an architect, and one was a politician. And they got into a conversation sitting on that plane together, and they started debating who represented the oldest profession. And after a considerable amount of debate, finally the surgeon said, well, I represent the oldest profession. The other two said, well, prove it. He said, well, I remember when I was a kid, I went to Vacation Bible School, and they read from that first book of the Bible, Genesis. And it talked about how God created Eve by taking a rib out of Adam, therefore he performed surgery, and that's the oldest profession. Well, the other two said, oh, okay. Well, the architect began to think. He said, wait a minute. I was in Sunday school when I was a boy, and I remember that book of Genesis. I remember that story, and I remember how it said that God created all of this out of chaos before he created man. Therefore, God had to have been an architect. The surgeon said, you know what, you're right. Well, the politician who was sitting over by the window said, yeah, but somebody had to first create the chaos. Now, look, I can pick because I'm a recovering politician. I'm on the 12th step. But I remember when it's a tough business, and I feel, Governor, I feel for you out there campaigning. I remember my first campaign. I was out. It was a hot summer afternoon, August, in Louisiana. It gets really hot, and I got caught in one of those afternoon rain showers, and I was going door to door, and I knocked on a lady's door, and she came to the door, and I handed her my card with my picture on it, and I said, hi, I'm Tony Perkins, I'm running for office. And she took the picture, and she looked at it, and she looked back at me. She says, my, that picture sure flatters you. It's a tough business, I'll tell you. Well, I'm going to share a story with you. One of my sons, I have 5 children. My oldest is 22. My youngest is 6. That's a story in itself, and I'm not going to tell that one tonight. But I had been out traveling, and I usually take one of my children with me, and we had gone with my 15-year-old had gone with me, and we had come back, and we live out in the country down in Louisiana, and trying to teach my kids to be a little self-sufficient, and we've got some chickens now and different things to teach them responsibility. And my 13-year-old daughter is responsible for the chickens. She's not real crazy about it, but she's in charge of the chickens. And she had been out feeding the chickens, and one of them slipped out the coop door while she was feeding them. And we had a stray dog that had been hanging around, and that dog, chomped down on that chicken, and that chicken was short-lived after that. And so there's just a couple of piles of feathers around, and we get back, and my 6-year-old, he was 5 at the time, he met us at the driveway, and he had to show David what had taken place while we were gone. So he goes out, meets us at the car, and he walks David over to these 2 piles of feathers, and he said, this is where the Dickon was mudded. little speech impediment. But he didn't cut that dog any slack. He said, this is where the chicken was murdered. He didn't put a spin on it. I'm not going to put a spin on where things are tonight. We are living in challenging times. But these are times of great opportunity. You know, as more and more people awaken to the reality that liberalism does not work. I mean, we've seen it on full display in the last 6 years. The foreign policies, the domestic policies, the economic policies, and they have not worked. Now, yes, I know these are challenging times. We look at, you pick up the newspaper any given day and you can see a list of reasons why you just want to pull the covers over your head or reach for the Malanta. But the reality is, people are looking for answers. And who better to provide those answers than those who know the truth and walk in the light? And this is, I believe, could be our finest hour. If you and I are willing to stand. That's why I just so, part of the reason I wanted to be here was for the theme of stand. Today there are too many that are cowering. There are others that are sitting on the sidelines. There are others that, as we call it back home in Louisiana, doing the crawfish. They kind of move backwards when the pressure's on. It's time for you and I to stand. We need to make no apologies for standing unapologetically for the truth. Yes, we must speak the truth in love, as Ephesians chapter 4 says, but we're to speak the truth nonetheless. And I want to encourage you to seize this moment. You know, I often wonder, I said, Lord, why wasn't I born 150 years ago? I would have fit in better. And then I realized we wouldn't have had air conditioning. You and I were entrusted with this moment in time. I want you to think about that. God made no mistake when He placed you on this earth for this time. We are here for such a time as this. God has placed you in a position of influence right where you are for such a time as this. It's not a time to sit back and say somebody else will do it. It's not a time to cower in the face of the growing voices of opposition. It's time to stand. Our country is worth it. Our families deserve it. And our God calls us to do it. It is our time to stand. I don't know if you've seen what's been happening in Houston in the last few days. Let me give you the kind of the background there. Houston was passing the mayor, and East Parker was pushed through the city council a ordinance, what is called the bathroom bill. It's a special rights for people based upon their sexual behavior. It gives men the right to use women's bathrooms if they wish, and vice versa. It's something that kindergartners would think and speak, this is crazy, because it is. Well, they forced it through the city council, despite the opposition of churches and the community. And then the community got organized, and they set a record by collecting 55,000 signatures to have a referendum to put this on the ballot. They only needed 17,269. The city secretary, who under the city charter is to receive these signatures, received them and went through 30% of them and said, "You've got plenty." Well, then, in an unusual move, the mayor and the city attorney stepped in and invalidated all of the signatures and denied the people their voice. So they filed a lawsuit. Well, over the weekend, the city issued a subpoena to 5 pastors and churches who were actually not a party to the lawsuit, demanding that they turn over all of their sermons and all of their communication, emails, text message, and everything else turned over to the city under the threat of imprisonment. Now, I was on Fox News last night talking about it. I said, you don't have to get a subpoena to get a sermon from a pastor. Every pastor in America will give you their sermon free of charge. But it wasn't about the sermon. It wasn't about the biblical instruction on homosexuality. This was about political intimidation. This was about trying to silence the voice of the church. And folks, I want you to know and understand and write this down. This is where that agenda leads. The agenda to redefine marriage and human sexuality leads with the silencing of the church. Now, I will tell you, just as I said this past Sunday morning when I was debating Ted Olson on this issue, you might think this is going to go away, that you can get the courts to solve this issue, but let me give you a lesson in history. Go back to 1973 when the courts said that they were going to resolve this nuisance called abortion for once and for all. 41 years later, the court has not resolved that issue. The issue of life is a matter in every political election from the president on down. And until we as a society welcome every child into our family, protected under our laws, abortion will continue to be an issue in America. And I will tell you, until we recognize God's creation, which is rooted and evident in nature, that marriage is a union of a man and a woman, that issue will not go away. I don't care how many times Barack Obama makes a speech about it. It's amazing to me how, because we see marriage, I get this question all the time, don't you think you're on the wrong side of history? Well, not quite. I got 5,000 on my side. What do you got? 5 years? I mean, in fact, if I'm a bigot because I believe marriage is a man and a woman, I mean, don't I hold the same position that Barack Obama had 2 years ago? Look, we must stand for what we know to be true and to be right. And we know from the social science, it's overwhelming that children do best with a mom and a dad. Now, I will be very candid. I've spent most of my public career in office working on marriage and family policy. And we have neglected the institution of marriage. And I believe in our churches that we need to uphold what marriage should be, because it is a reflection of the relationship between Christ and the church. And so we need to promote marriage as well as protect marriage in the churches today. But I want to tell you, these pastors are resolute. They are not going to turn over anything to the city. They're not going to buckle under. They're not going to be intimidated. This mayor is using her bully pulpit to try to silence the pulpits of Houston. And I hope you'll stand with those pastors as they stand against this intimidation of government. By the way, you may have seen a recent Pew poll that was just released a couple of weeks ago. 72% of Americans see religion losing its influence in public life. But the majority of those who said that's a bad thing. In fact, the number of Americans who think the church should be more vocal in speaking to this issue continues to rise, to where now a majority of Americans believe the church should be speaking to these issues. So pastors, speak to these issues. By the way, I want to speak for just a moment on the election that elected Mayor Parker to one of the nation's largest cities. Do you know what the voter turnout was in the election in which she won? 16%. 16%. There were enough people sitting in the pews of those churches that could have altered the outcome of that election. Oftentimes, the policies that we are living under are the result of our own apathy and indifference. Don't let that happen in South Dakota. you have the ability, just in our churches alone, when you consider the number of people, unfortunately, that don't vote, if we could just increase our turnout in our churches 5 or 10%, we could alter the outcome of most elections. You and I must stand for what we know to be true and what we know to be right. You know, we talk about our churches. I hear this a lot, and I know this is probably not from anyone that's here tonight, but I remember when I was running for office, and I had a lot of pastor friends until I ran for office. And there was this idea that, well, politics is bad. It's dirty. You're going to get dirty. In fact, I remember it took us some while to tell our family that I was going to run for office. And my wife and I, we decided we better tell everybody I'm going to run for office. And so we sat down and we said, you know, I'm going to run for the state legislature. And we got it back, well, you're going to become corrupt just like the rest of them. Now, granted, that came from my wife's side of the family, but there's this idea that we got to stay away from politics, that it's dirty. William Penn, the founder of Pennsylvania, said this. He said, government is like clocks in that it takes its motion from men. If men be good, government cannot help but be good. If we want to change the character of government, we got to change the character of those who go into government. If we want righteous government, if that's what we pray for, and I hear this, you know, churches all the time are saying, well, let's pray for righteous government, as if government was some type of inanimate object that somehow could just change magically. Government is a reflection of the people that we put in government. And the only way that we're going to change the character of government is by if we want righteous government, we got to put righteous men and women in positions. That's not perfect. There's no perfect politician, but we do have some godly men and women who are statesmen, who will lead in the direction that is true and right, regardless of the personal consequences. Those are the ones that we must support. And if you think, oh, somebody else will do it, I'm going to tell you, they're not going to get the funding from the labor unions. They're not going to get the funding from the gambling interest. If we want righteous men and women in government, you and I are going to be the ones that supports them financially and volunteers with our time. This is extremely important, what I'm about to say. Not that the other stuff wasn't important, but this is important too. More so because this time in which we're living, where we're seeing this increase in tolerance toward Christianity here at home. There are Christian brothers and sisters in faraway places that are dying for their faith because you and I are not standing for ours here at home. Let me explain that. Just recently at our Values Voters Summit in Washington, D.C., about 2 weekends ago, we presented our first ever Cost of Discipleship Award to Maryam Ibrahim, the Sudanese Christian mother, 27 years old, in prison in Khartoum, sentenced to die for her faith in Jesus Christ. She had at her side a toddler that was 20 months old named Martin. She was 8 months pregnant. She was shackled to the floor of this cell. And this prison, by the way, is one of the most notoriously dangerous prisons in the world. In fact, the UN did a report on this prison in Khartoum about 5 years ago. And in this prison, where it's very common for children to be in prison with their mother, 1 infant a day dies in this prison as a result of the conditions. She was 8 months pregnant. She had a 20-month-old toddler at her side, and her husband is wheelchair bound. And they pointed to the door for Maryam. They said, Maryam, there's the door. You can be a free woman if you'll denounce your faith in Jesus Christ. And not once, not twice, but 3 times, Maryam refused to renounce her faith in Jesus Christ. Now, I know what a mother will do to save and to protect her children. There is not a greater natural instinct in a mother than to protect her children. And knowing that there was no one to care for her 20-month-old and that she had within her the life of a new little girl, she refused to deny her Savior. You and I are not being asked to die for Christ. We're simply being asked to live for Him. And as you and I shrink back from this cultural collision that our nation has been set upon, and we shrink back from defending the faith because, we just don't want to offend anyone. Or we don't want people to mock us. We don't want them to write bad editorials about us. When you and I shrink back, and the religious hostility grows in this country, and our government becomes more indifferent to Christianity, believers in faraway places die. Even tonight, as we're gathered here, there are American Christians like Pastor Saeed Abedini, who for 2 years now has been in an Iranian jail, and this administration has yet to speak on his behalf. North Korea, we have American Christians being held simply because of their faith. Friends, you and I have an obligation to stand for our faith so that others may have hope that they will be free. Let me close with this. I'll share a little story. About a year ago, I was invited to go and speak at an event, and I took this one, Dale, because it was in our favorite place, really all the country. It was in the mountains of Tennessee. My grandmother was actually born in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, and we loved to go to Tennessee, to Pigeon Forge. Actually, we take a vacation there almost every year. If you were with driving distance, we would come here, but a little further out. So I told my wife, I said, I've been asked to come and speak at this event, and I said, how about we go up there and we camp for a week. I'll speak, and then we'll just take some time and we'll have a good time. She said, oh, that's great. A few years ago, I bought a motorhome, and I wanted to be intentional about spending time with our 5 children. And I tell you put 7 people in a motorhome, and that's called intense fellowship. Now, I describe myself as a conservative. My wife calls me cheap. But when we're on the road, I like to, we'll spend the night in Walmart parking lots, in the RV. It's a pretty cheap way to go. Conservative way to go, I should say. Well, we had taken off, and we had spent the first night in a Walmart parking lot, and we were heading out the next morning. We were going to a place called Cleveland, Tennessee. Anybody been there? Anybody know where Cleveland, Tennessee is at? Yeah. Well, we were going rafting. We usually like to go rafting. So we were going to go rafting first, and we're going to go on up to Pigeon Forge. And we were driving through the middle of town, kind of missed the bypass, so we were going through the middle of town, traffic. And my oldest daughter was sitting in the passenger seat next to me, and we were discussing, what families generally talk about on vacation, about how the politicians are destroying the country. And we were going through this intersection and about to go under this overpass. And just as we were doing that, my wife pointed at the sign. She goes, I don't think. And I saw the sign at that point, 10 feet, 10 inches. The RV's 12 inches. We made it through, not all of us, but we made it through. There was a lot of scratching and screeching and dust, and it was one of those moments where you don't know if you should cry or scream. And so my wife said, just keep driving. And we were in traffic, we couldn't get over, so we're driving, and we finally find a spot where we can pull off to the side, and she says, pull over and I'll get out and see how bad it is. Well, I could see daylight. I knew how bad it was. Maybe she thought the Lord was going to answer her prayers before she got out. She jumps out. 30 seconds later, she's back in. She goes, "It's bad." I mean, we're on this is our first day. The day after the next, I'm supposed to speak, and this is where we're staying. So I'm in this RV, and I'm thinking, what are we going to do? So we're frantic trying to figure out what we're going to do, where we're going to go. And as if you didn't think it could get any worse, all of a sudden the bottom falls out of the sky and the rain starts to come down. And my 5-year-old grabs a pan out of the kitchen. He's walking around trying to catch the rain coming in. So finally she identifies, she's calling the insurance, trying to find anybody. We find a place back in Chattanooga, about 45 miles away. And so I get out the duct tape and get up there and try to tape it up as best as I can. And we start making the journey back. And it's about this time it begins to settle in on me. I'm driving a 12-foot RV, and I drive under a 10-foot, 10-inch bridge. I felt like an idiot. So I said, "Honey, when we get there, you go in and tell them what happened." So we get there, and got a great wife. She goes in and she tells them what happens. And I'm standing at the side, kind of covering my face. The guy comes out, and he tells me immediately where it happened, the bridge, the road. I put my hand down, and he goes, "We get at least one of these a month." I didn't feel so bad. Of course, I was trying to ask him how much it was going to cost, because I was trying to figure out which child wasn't going to college. But fortunately, my parents were going to be meeting us up there, so they were not too far behind, and they came, and we got a U-Haul, and we put all of our stuff in the U-Haul, piled in the car with them, and went on to Pigeon Forge. I mean, we looked like the Clampetts rolling into to Pigeon Forge. Well, I'd called my assistant. I said, "Look, you've got to find us a place to stay." Now, I don't know if you've ever tried this or not. Don't try it. To find a place at the last minute in Pigeon Forge in July. Well, I got, I think, the last hotel room in Pigeon Forge, and it was like a pet hotel. I mean, I'm walking down the hallway, and dogs are barking and scratching, and I'm thinking, I didn't sleep much that night. Get up the next morning, and I said, "You know what? Let's just go home." Have you ever been there where you have all these great expectations? I'd actually been serving as interim pastor at a church for 3 months. It was the first break I'd had in 3 months. And I'm kind of arguing with the Lord. I go out that morning, I go run, and I said, "Lord, what am I doing? I mean, I thought I was serving you." You know how it is. We throw our own pity party. And so I told my wife, I said, "Let's just go home. I'll call them and tell them we had an accident. They can get somebody else to fill in for me." It was a conference, and you know how those speakers are. They're long-winded. They'll take up my time in no time anyway. So she goes, "Well, let's go see your parents." So we packed everything back in the U-Haul, and we were going to head on. And so we were going to go stop at my parents were staying in a condo, a nice one, no dogs. And so we're driving down. This is 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning. Now, I will warn you, there's another bridge in this story. So we're driving down Pigeon Forge, and as Dale mentioned in my introduction, I spent about 10 years as a police officer. But all of a sudden, these police cars come up along the side of me with their lights going on, driving around us on the sidewalk, trying to get around us. I'm thinking, this is Pigeon Forge. Whatever happens in Pigeon Forge, especially at 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning, this is odd. And so we're pulling off onto a bridge to go up across up a hill to where my parents were staying. And just as we get onto the bridge, they end up blocking off both ends of the bridge. And then I see a uniformed officer standing out at the side, and there is a woman on the bridge about ready to jump. And as the officer is approaching the woman, she's moving further out on the edge, about to jump. So I told my wife, I said, you take the car. I'm going to go see if I can help them. There's just these two uniformed officers, and one of them stopped me, and I showed them my credentials. I still work with the Law Enforcement Commission. And they said, "Can you help us?" I said, "I'm a chaplain. I can help." So I went over. Long story short, I spent about 45 minutes talking this woman down off the bridge onto the curb, and sat and prayed with her and heard her story. Her son was in the Navy, and she hadn't heard from him. She was having all these issues, just like so many people out there today are having so many challenges and issues. And she was on medication that she had been off, and so I went with her to the hospital in the back of the police car, and we went to the hospital where she was examined, and they ended up admitting her. And the police took me back to the condo where my wife and kids and parents were. And as my wife opened the door, she just ran to me, and she didn't say a word. She just hugged me with tears in her eyes. And I knew exactly what she was saying. Aren't you glad we didn't go home? You know, you and I, we do get discouraged. We give and we give and we give, and we don't see the changes that we want. We don't see the transformation that we're praying for and that we're looking for and we're working for. And sometimes we're tempted just to say, you know what, let's just pack up and go home. I've done my part. Let's let somebody else do it now. But who's to say that maybe it's you and I, that because we refuse to give up, because we refuse to go home, that we might be the ones that talks our society and our country and off the edge. Our country needs us. Our country needs you. Our call is to stand. Paul, in his closing word to the Ephesians, in the 6th chapter, he says, finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. He said, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the spiritual host of wickedness in heavenly places. And he exhorts us to put on the spiritual armor of God. For what reason? So that we might be able to stand in the evil day. My friends, the evil day is here. Our call is to stand. May God give you the grace, may God give you the strength, and may God give you the courage to stand in this our day of opportunity. God bless you.